thought I was invisible. For 3 years, I thought that was the deal. You push the mop, you keep your head down, you don't make eye contact with the people in the pressed shirts, and everyone stays comfortable. I thought that was the agreement, unspoken but ironclad, between the woman who cleaned the floors of Hartwell and Liang Consulting and the people who walked across them without a second glance. I thought I understood my place in that building, and I thought, this is the part that still tightens something in my chest when I say it out loud, I thought keeping that place was protecting something. I was wrong about all of it. What I didn't know on that particular Tuesday morning in October was that the invisible woman with the mop was about to become the most dangerous person in the room. The morning it happened, I had been cleaning the executive corridor since 6:15. That was my favorite stretch of the day. The building still quiet, the overhead lights not fully awake, the long hallway smelling of industrial cleaner, and faintly of the jasmine diffuser that Ms. Patricia Holt kept plugged in near her desk outside the partners' suite. Patricia was the executive assistant to both senior partners, and she treated that jasmine diffuser like a territorial marking. It meant, this hallway is mine. It meant, you are a guest here at best and furniture at worst. I had learned, over 3 years, to clean quickly and silently in Patricia's domain, to finish before she arrived at 8:30, to leave no trace of myself except gleaming floors and emptied bins. That morning, I was running behind. The service elevator had been slow, and I had spent 20 minutes longer than usual in the second-floor conference room because someone, probably from the late client dinner the night before, had left a full coffee carafe upended over the credenza, and the cleanup had been careful, methodical work. So by 8:40, I was still on the executive corridor, on my knees beside the supply cart, repacking cleaning cloths into their labeled pouches, when I heard the elevator open and the sharp, purposeful click of Patricia Holt's heels on the marble. I did not look up. I kept my hands moving. The trick I had learned long ago was never to draw attention to the fact that you were there, not with eye contact, not with sound, not even with the wrong kind of stillness. You became part of the architecture. You became as unremarkable as the potted plants or the framed certificates on the walls, those diplomas and awards that told the building's story in gold lettering, while people like me told it in buffed floors and invisible effort. Patricia's footsteps slowed as she passed me. I heard the soft intake of breath that meant she had noticed I was still there, in her corridor, past her unofficial boundary of 8:30. I kept packing the cloths. She said nothing. The heels resumed, and I heard her drop her bag at her desk with a precise thud, heard the click of her computer waking, heard the low orchestral sound of her email client loading. I thought, I'm almost done. I thought, 2 more minutes and I'll be invisible again, the way this arrangement requires. What I didn't know was that 15 minutes later, the senior partner from the Shanghai head office, Mr. Wei Dongfang, who had flown in the previous evening for the quarterly review that the entire firm had been preparing for over 6 weeks, was going to walk off that same elevator with a problem that no one in the building could solve, and that Patricia Holt, faced with that problem, was going to look down the corridor, point at me, and say something that would undo 3 years of careful invisibility in a single sentence. My name is Clara Meng. I was 41 years old that October, and I had been cleaning commercial offices since I was 34. Before that, I had been a senior interpreter and business liaison at a mid-sized trading company in Shanghai. 8 years of board meetings, contract negotiations, cross-cultural consultations, my Mandarin and English working simultaneously in my head like 2 trains on parallel tracks. I had been good at it. I had been, if I am honest with myself in the way I rarely permitted back then, exceptional at it. I held certifications in legal and financial interpretation. I had once spent 11 hours in a single session interpreting a merger negotiation between a Chinese infrastructure company and a European consortium, and when it was over, both sides had shaken my hand before they shook each other's. That was the version of myself I had packed into a drawer when I came to this country with my daughter Lynn, 7 years old and already fierce, following my divorce from a man whose cruelty had been quiet and cumulative, the kind that leaves no marks you can photograph and no incidents you can report, only a slow erosion of the person you used to be. I had come here with Lynn and a single reference letter and a level of English that I had built painstakingly over years. My interpreter credentials were not recognized in this country without additional examination and registration fees I couldn't afford in the first years. And so I had cleaned. I had cleaned offices and hotels and private homes, and I had been reliable and careful and silent, and I had put Lynn through school. And Lynn was now 16 and studying 3 languages and building robotics kits at the kitchen table with a focused ferocity that made me feel, on my hardest days, that the trade had been worth it, that the years of invisible labor had bought something real, something lasting, something that could not be taken. I told almost no one about my previous life. It wasn't shame exactly. It was something more complicated, a protective instinct, a decision not to make my diminishment into a story that other people could hold and use. The cleaning supervisor, a kind Georgian woman named Nino, knew a little. She had asked me once why my English was so precise, and I had told her simply that I had worked in international business before, and she had nodded with a look that said she understood something about reinvention and did not require the full inventory of losses. No one at Hartwell and Liang knew anything. I was Clara, the cleaner who worked the executive floor Monday through Thursday. I was the mop and the cart and the gleaming floors. I was invisible. The quarterly review was supposed to begin at 9 o'clock in the main boardroom. I knew this because preparing the boardroom for major meetings was part of my extended Thursday responsibilities. I had been in there at 7 that morning, polishing the long table, straightening the leather chairs, arranging the water carafes and the small glass bowls of wrapped mints that Ms. Patricia considered essential to the firm's presentation of itself. The room had smelled of wood polish and cold air conditioning, and the very particular tension of a space that is waiting to be occupied by important things. I had finished and slipped out before the first associates arrived to set up their laptops and presentation materials, and I had felt, as I often did leaving that room, a strange mixture of pride and grief. Pride because the room was immaculate, grief because I would never sit in it. By 8:50, I was finishing the corridor, and I could already hear, from the elevator bank, the sounds of the morning's gathering momentum. Voices, the rolling of a wheeled briefcase, someone on a phone speaking in fast, pressured English about delayed slides. And then the elevator opened again, and 2 things happened in close sequence. A tall, silver-haired man in a charcoal suit stepped out, moving with the particular stillness of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. And directly behind him came a younger Chinese man in a dark jacket who was speaking rapidly and quietly in Mandarin, leaning close to the silver-haired man's ear with the barely suppressed urgency of someone delivering bad news. Patricia Holt rose from her desk. Her smile was immediate and professional, the kind of smile that is also a form of control. It signals welcome while simultaneously directing traffic. Mr. Wei, welcome. We have everything prepared for 9 o'clock. Can I get you anything before? The silver-haired man, Mr. Wei Dongfeng, stopped her with a small, courteous gesture. He turned slightly to the young man beside him and spoke, still in Mandarin, and I understood every word with the effortless, full-body comprehension of a native speaker. The interpreter they had arranged, a woman from a translation agency, had suffered a medical emergency the previous night and was in the hospital. The backup the agency had sent did not, upon the car ride from the hotel, demonstrate adequate fluency in financial and contract terminology. The quarterly review involved not only presentation, but a substantial renegotiation of terms, amendments to 3 existing contracts, a new service agreement, and the outline of a joint venture that was sensitive, multi-layered, and absolutely not survivable on approximate translation. Mr. Wei was not panicking because Mr. Wei did not visibly panic, but the young man's face, his assistant, I assumed, was carrying enough controlled alarm for both of them. Patricia Holt had been watching this exchange with the polished attentiveness of someone who understood that something was wrong without understanding its content. "Is there something I can help with?" she asked. "An issue with the arrangements?" Mr. Wei smiled, a thin, pleasant smile that communicated warmth without warmth. "A small matter. We need to confirm our interpretation arrangements. Is there someone on staff who speaks Mandarin fluently?" Patricia's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Concern, calculation, the very specific flicker of a person reviewing their mental inventory and finding it empty. Hartwell and Liang Consulting had a Chinese surname in its title because the founding partner, James Liang, had built the firm's Shanghai connections over 30 years. But James Liang was semi-retired, present only for certain client meetings, and was not scheduled to arrive until 9:15. The associates who handled the Shanghai accounts spoke conversational Mandarin at best, greeting and gratitude level, adequate for dinners, useless for contract renegotiation. Patricia knew this. Her expression told me she knew this. Her eyes moved down the corridor in that involuntary way that eyes move when they are searching for a solution in the wrong direction. And then her eyes found me. I was still kneeling beside my supply cart, cloths repacked, hands resting on the edge of the cart's lower shelf, watching this unfold with the still, careful attention I had trained myself into over years. I had understood every word of Mr. Wei's conversation with his assistant. I had understood the problem completely, and I had, in the 3 seconds before Patricia's eyes reached me, made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a declaration, but a quiet internal shifting of weight, like a person who has been leaning against a wall deciding, finally, to stand upright. Patricia Holt pointed at me. She actually pointed, the index finger of her right hand extended down the corridor toward where I knelt in my gray uniform with my supply cart and my mop handle leaning against the wall behind me. "She speaks Chinese," Patricia said. Her tone was the tone of someone gesturing at office supplies, identifying a resource, categorizing a tool. Not unkind exactly, just completely unaware that she was pointing at a person. "She's one of our cleaning staff. I've heard her on her phone a few times." The silence that followed that sentence was about 2 seconds long. Mr. Wei Dongfang looked at me. His assistant looked at me. Patricia looked at Mr. Wei, then back at me, with the mildly expectant expression of someone who has solved a small logistics problem. I stood up. I straightened my uniform, gray cotton, the Hartwell and Liang service contractor logo on the left breast pocket, and I walked toward them, not hurrying, not hesitating. My shoes were rubber-soled and made no sound on the marble. The supply cart stayed where it was. I stopped at a professional distance from Mr. Wei and his assistant, and I addressed Mr. Wei directly, in Mandarin, and I used the formal register without thinking about it, the way you use a language you have never really stopped speaking, even when you have gone years without using it in any room that mattered. I said, "Mr. Wei, I understand you need qualified interpretation for contract and financial negotiations this morning. I hold a Level 3 certification in financial and legal interpretation from the China Accreditation Test for Translators and Interpreters, and I have 8 years of experience in corporate negotiations, including merger facilitation and contract renegotiation. I'm available." Mr. Wei Dongfang looked at me for a long moment. Not the way people look at furniture, the other way, the way you look at something you did not expect to find where you found it. His assistant had gone entirely still. And then Mr. Wei said, quietly, in English, so that Patricia could hear, "What is your name?" "Clara Meng," I said. He nodded slowly. "Miss Meng, would you be willing to assist us this morning?" And then, from behind me, I heard it. The sound that would become the sound I replayed for weeks afterward. Not with anger, though anger was part of it, but with a complex, layered emotion that I still don't have a clean word for. Patricia Holt laughed. It was a short, reflexive sound, involuntary the way a hiccup is involuntary. quickly suppressed, but not quickly enough. Mr. Wei, she's the cleaning staff. She's a contractor. I'm not sure she probably speaks conversational. Patricia, the voice came from the elevator, and every head in the corridor turned. The elevator doors had opened while we were talking, and in them stood a man I recognized, James Liang, senior founding partner, who was not supposed to arrive until 9:15. He was 67, compact and precise, with the measured energy of someone who had once been fast and had chosen to become deliberate. He was looking at the scene with an expression I could not immediately read. Not quite surprise, not quite recognition, something more complex than either. He stepped out of the elevator. He was looking at me. "Clara," he said, and the entire corridor rearranged itself. James Liang did not look surprised to see me. That was the first thing I registered, and it lodged in my chest like a splinter. Not painful yet, but present, impossible to ignore. He stepped off the elevator with his leather briefcase in hand, his silver cufflinks catching the overhead light, and he looked at me with an expression that was careful and deliberate, and not, as I say, surprised. He looked at Mr. Wei and nodded, a greeting between men of equal standing, brief and precise. He looked at Patricia, whose smile had gone rigid, and then he looked back at me and said my name again, quietly, as if testing its weight. "Clara." "Mr. Liang," I said. "You've met Mr. Wei," he said. It was not a question. "We were just introducing ourselves," I said. My voice was steady. I was slightly amazed by this. James Liang set his briefcase down on Patricia's desk and looked at Mr. Wei, speaking in Mandarin, fluid and practiced, the Mandarin of a man who had built half his life in Shanghai. "Mr. Wei, I apologize for the inconvenience this morning. Miss Meng is one of the most qualified interpreters I have encountered in 20 years of business. I would trust her with any negotiation in this firm." He paused. "She simply chooses to be here in a different capacity." The silence in the corridor was extraordinary. Several people were rapidly revising their understanding of what they were looking at. Patricia Holt's face had gone the color of old paper. She was staring at James Liang with the frozen, calculating look of someone trying to determine, very quickly, exactly how much damage had been done. I watched her arrive at the answer. It was written in the slight drop of her chin, the way her hand moved to straighten the items on her desk. Small motions of a person buying time while the floor shifts beneath them. Mr. Wei looked at me with quiet, professional recalibration. "Miss Meng, would you be willing to assist us this morning? We would, of course, compensate you at full professional rate." I thought about Lynn at home, about the robotics kit on the kitchen table and the 3 language textbooks stacked on her nightstand. I thought about 3 years of early mornings and gleaming floors and the practiced art of being invisible. I thought about all of it in the space of 2 seconds, and then I said, yes. Patricia asked to speak with James Liang before the session began. I moved to gather my supply cart, not to listen, but the executive hallway is marble and glass, and Patricia Holt had slightly misjudged the volume of a voice stripped of composure. "You know her," Patricia said, accusation dressed as a question. "I know her work," James said evenly. "We worked together through a consulting firm in Shanghai years ago. She did liaison work on a project I was involved with. She's been cleaning these floors for 3 years. You hired her. You knew this entire time." "What did I know, Patricia?" His voice was still even, but weighted now, the low harmonic of a man choosing his words carefully. "I knew a person I respected was going through a difficult period and needed stable income while she rebuilt. I knew she asked me not to disclose her background. That was her choice to make, not mine." A pause. "What I didn't know was that I would arrive to find her pointed at like a directory listing." Longer silence. "That won't happen again," James Liang said, and the sentence closed like a door. I kept walking. My rubber-soled shoes made no sound. I pushed through the service corridor door and stood in the harsh fluorescent light with my back against the wall and my hands flat on the cool painted concrete, and I breathed. The corridor smelled of industrial cleaner and warm elevator machinery, and I stood there and let that smell fill my lungs, and I thought about what it costs to accept invisibility as a condition of survival. I thought about Lynn, 2 years ago, sitting across the kitchen table with her textbooks pushed aside. She had asked me, seriously and directly, "Mama, do you miss what you used to do? Before?" I had said, without hedging, yes. She had looked at me for a long moment, and then said something that had lodged in me like a seed. "Then why are you hiding?" I had told her it was complicated. She had looked at me with the compassion of a child who sees their parent clearly and decides, in that moment, to be patient. I stood in the service corridor and thought about that conversation, and I felt something that had been quiet in me for 3 years become slowly loud. I put the cart against the wall. I called Nino, my supervisor. She said in her warm Georgian English, "Clara, you go. I cover your floors." "You go." I tucked the phone away, pushed open the service door, walked back into the marble corridor, and told James Liang I was ready. The boardroom was everything I had cleaned it to be. The long table gleaming, the leather chairs aligned, the water carafes catching light from floor-to-ceiling windows. 11 people around the table, and me in a gray cleaning uniform in a chair that James Liang pulled out with a deliberate gesture that was, I understood, not accidental. Patricia brought in a laptop for me, set it down without looking at me, her hands not quite steady, and left the room quickly. The negotiation lasted 9 hours. The point is the language. Mandarin moving through me like water through a channel, long unused but still perfectly shaped. The financial register returning not haltingly, but completely, the way a body remembers how to swim. 40 minutes in, Mr. Wei said something in rapid, Shanghai-accented Mandarin about a clause the legal counsel had flagged as ambiguous, and I rendered it accurately, then added a quiet aside. In mainland financial contracts, this phrasing carries a specific implied meaning that does not transfer literally. The clause likely intended the alternative reading. The Shanghai head of legal looked up from her papers and nodded, precisely. "She's right," she said to Mr. Wei. He looked at me with recalibration, and this time there was something additional in it, the look you give a colleague. The first twist came at noon, during the lunch break. Patricia was waiting in the hallway. "I wanted to apologize," she said carefully, "for this morning. I didn't know your background." "I know you didn't," I said. "If I had known, would it have been different?" I asked. I kept my voice quiet. I was genuinely curious. She stopped. The composed expression slipped, and underneath it I saw something I had not expected. Not malice, but a confusion that was almost like distress. "I think I would have treated you differently." "Yes. That's the problem," I said gently. "Not you specifically, just that. The idea that knowing changes it, that the mop is what I am until you know otherwise." I paused. "I'll be back in the boardroom in 3 minutes. The second twist came at 4 o'clock, when the negotiation reached the joint venture outline. I noticed the discrepancy, structural, not dramatic, a clause that in English read as a standard profit-sharing arrangement, but that, in the Mandarin framing Mr. Wei's team was working from, implied a different allocation of decision-making authority. Not fraud, not intentional, but the kind of misalignment that becomes a lawsuit in 3 years. I stopped the interpretation mid-sentence. "I need to flag something," I said, and the room went still. I explained it, in English first, then in Mandarin, and watched both sides of the table absorb the fact that they had been about to agree to something they did not agree on. David, the legal counsel, pulled the document toward him and read it twice. "She's right," he said, with the tone of someone who is grateful and slightly mortified in equal measure. The session extended by 2 hours. The joint venture outline was restructured. When it was done, and the room breathed out the long collective exhale of people who have done hard work well, Mr. Wei stood and looked at me across the table and said, in English, so everyone could hear, "Miss Meng, you saved us from a significant problem today. You also gave us something better than a clean agreement, a shared understanding. That is harder to find than you might think. He paused. "I would like to discuss something with you and Mr. Liang before I leave for Shanghai." The discussion happened in James Liang's office. City spread silver and gray behind the window. 30 minutes. When it was done, I sat with the offer in my hands. Not a paper, just words, but words with the weight of something real. And I asked for until Monday. They gave it to me. That evening, I told Lynn everything. The Shanghai years, the skills, the reasons I had put them in a drawer, the thing that had happened in the corridor. She listened without interrupting, which was not like her. When I finished, she put both hands flat on the table in a gesture I recognized as mine. "Good," she said. "Now stop hiding." I started laughing, the kind that comes when someone names the exact thing you've been carrying, and Lynn started laughing too. And we sat at the kitchen table until it became something adjacent to crying, and the kitchen smelled of tea and plasticky robotics components, and the warmth of a room being inhabited fully for the first time in a long while. I accepted on Monday, Senior Interpretation and Client Liaison, joint venture between Hartwell and Liang and Mr. Wei's Shanghai office. The salary was more than I had earned in Shanghai. The third twist arrived on my last day as a cleaning contractor. Patricia watched me finish the corridor, and when I was done, I stopped at her desk. "Thank you for pointing," I said. She stared at me. "When Mr. Wei needed an interpreter, you pointed at me. You didn't mean it the way it landed, but it started everything. So, thank you." Something moved through her face, honest, still settling. "I didn't know," she said again, this time without the defensive edge. This time, it sounded like something that had arrived and was real. "No," I said. "Most people don't." I left the supply cart in the service corridor for the last time. I walked out through the front entrance, the lobby with its marble floors I had buffed, I calculated once, approximately 624 times. Eddie, the doorman, saw me in street clothes and held the door with a slight widening of his eyes. "Different door today," I said. He laughed, surprised, real, and said, "Good for you." By January, I was sitting in boardrooms again, not cleaning them. In February, Lynn won a regional science competition, and when she stood at the front of the auditorium and found my face in the third row, she grinned. That fast, low grin that blooms into something full and unstoppable. I felt something complete itself, something interrupted long ago that had finally, in its own circuitous way, found its ending. I still walk past that building sometimes. The floors inside are gleaming. Someone is keeping them that way, rising early, working quietly, keeping their head down. I know what that work costs and what it protects, with my whole body, with the intimacy of 3 years of repetition. I don't feel pity when I walk past, and I don't feel superiority. I feel what a person feels after crossing a long distance on foot and arriving somewhere warm, tired in a good way, and clear and present. Lynn asked me later if I regretted those 3 years. I thought about it honestly. I thought about Nino, who covered my floors without hesitation. I thought about Eddie and his surprised laugh. I thought about Patricia's pointing finger and the silence that followed it. "No," I said. And then, because she always deserved precision, "But I won't do it again. Some lessons don't need repeating." She nodded, satisfied. She picked up her robotics kit, and the kitchen filled with the small, purposeful sounds of a person building something.